we will start off with chapter number 10, Determinants of Aggregates. What do you mean by the term determinants? Determinants means what are the factors that are responsible for a particular activity, and aggregates means the total. Total of anything means aggregates. Total, aggregates, summation. These are the three things which mean the same. What do you mean by aggregates in the terms of economics? Where do you use word aggregates? Aggregate means total of goods and services. Demand. You have total demand for goods and services, right? That is in the economy during a given period of time, right? So total demand of goods and services at a particular time and at a particular price level. So it is the aggregate demand of goods and services, not always at a particular time. Suppose the demand of goods and services for the month of February and at a particular price level, that is the demand for goods and services in the month of February, for rupees 14 the demand was 18 units. So it is like demand of goods and services at a particular time and at a particular price level, right? And it measures total spending by all the different sections of the economy. You have different sections of the economy, and that is demand. Demand means by whom? Who is demanding? Demand is by consumers, right? Who is demanding? Consumers are demanding, right? Who else is demanding? Business units are demanding. And who else is demanding? Government sector is demanding. Right? So there are three people who are creating the demand for goods and services at a particular time and at a particular price level. These three people are consumers, business units and government. Consumers are demanding for goods and services. Business units are also demanding, but they have a demand of a different nature, maybe capital goods, intermediate goods, and government also has certain demands, right? So this is all we will study in demand. So demand, you have certain things which you will study under this. We will let's see what aggregate demand means. See, technically you have to study what does aggregate demand means. Aggregate demand, you have four types of demand. You have consumption demand. This is consumption demand. Next you have investment demand, right? Then you have the government demand, and lastly you have the foreign demand. You have consumption demand. Consumption demand or expenditure, whatever you can write. You are putting money into it, that is you are creating the demand, and let's see what does it mean. Incurred by the consumers. See, this is in consumption demand is by the consumer section. When you directly want to consume the good, that is known as the consumption demand, that is made by the consumers, right? Then we have the investment demand, that is made by the private firms. Generally, the firms, the producing firms, they make the investment demand. Next is government demand, that is undertaken by the government. And lastly you have the foreign demand, that is foreign demand means that is the difference between exports and imports, right? So you have consumption demand, right? Now consumption demand is always made by the consumers, right? Next is you have the investment demands. Who makes the investment? The private firms. The firms makes the investment. Government demand, that is risen by the government themselves, and foreign demand, that is through exports and imports, right? So this is technically aggregate demand means. Next we will study the determinants of aggregate demand. We have aggregate demand that consists of following components. See, we will study the component parts also. Components means, as we study, the first is consumption demand, right? So you have consumption demand that is also depicted, or you can also write it as C. Alright, that is consumption demand. Next you have investment demand. Investment demand, that is denoted by I. Government demand is denoted by G, and lastly you have the foreign demand. Exports minus the imports. So you have AD, that is the aggregate demand, C plus I plus G, and you have plus X minus M. Alright, this is how you will find out the aggregate demand. Aggregate demand is the total demand. Total demand means consumption demand also, plus investment demand, plus demand from the government side, and plus the foreign demand, that is the exports minus the imports. These are the determinants or the components of the aggregate demand. Consumption demand you denoted by C, investment demand you denoted by I, government demand by G, and foreign demand by X minus M. So if exports are more, imports are less, you will have positive foreign demand, and if your imports are more and exports are less, you will have a negative foreign demand. So this is how you will determine the demand. Let us study individually what does consumption, investment, government and foreign demand means. We have consumption demand first of all, right? Consumption demand means it is a part of aggregate demand. Consumption demand is one of the component of or determinant of the aggregate demand. It refers to the consumption expenditure incurred by the consumers in the economy, that is the total demand of goods and services in a given period of time, right? So consumption demand means again the total demand of goods and services by the consumers. Alright, by the consumers at a given point of time and at a given price level. That is known as the consumption demand. See, you have autonomous consumption expenditure or demand, and you have induced consumption demand. You have autonomous consumption expenditure or demand, whatever you can write, and you have induced consumption expenditure or demand. Right? What do you mean by autonomous consumption expenditure? It is incurred when the income is zero. It is incurred irrespective of the size of the income for expenditure on the basis of borrowing. See, even if your income is zero, there is a demand for certain things. That is known as autonomous consumption expenditure. When the consumers demand for a certain commodity, even if their income is zero, that is known as an autonomous consumption expenditure or autonomous consumption demand. Whereas induced consumption expenditure, which is incurred depending on the level of income. If your level of income is high, you will demand more of that commodity and you will demand it faster. But if your level of income is low, then your demand will also decrease. So according to the level of income, the income demand decreases and increases, that is induced demand. And even if the level of income is zero, you have a demand for a commodity, that is autonomous consumption expenditure. Next we will study the determinants of consumption demand. You have the first determinant of consumption demand. You have determinants you will study, or the features. First you have the level of household income. Level of household income. If the income of the household is high, it can spend more on goods and services. See, it depends upon the consumption demand is made by the consumers. Where do the consumers stay? They stay in the household, and the consumers stay in the house, and the household demand depends upon the consumer's level of income. If the level of the income of the people of that house is more, there will be more of the consumption demand. You will buy those commodities which are generally bought by the consumers. That is the direct consumption. So household demand will depend on the consumption demand will depend on the household income. Depending on the household income, the consumption demand is determined. Next is disposable income. Very important. You have a certain level of income, and that level of income is known as the household income, which is for you to spend. But from that income, you are going to meet the priorities, you are going to meet the taxes, you are going to pay the certain bills, and then whatever money is left, you will put that money in for the consumption expenditure. So whatever money is left out after paying the taxes, the bills and the other necessities, whatever income is left for the consumers to spend on consumption, that is known as the disposable income. So a person cannot spend, you cannot spend your entire income on the purchases of the consumer products, or you cannot have the full supply of income on the consumption demand. So you have to have certain things, or gross income that you have paid taxes and other things. So it will be disposable income. Basically has a formula. Disposable income means you have the total income, you have the total income minus the direct taxes. So whenever from total income you are paying out the taxes, after that what is left for you to spend it the way you want, that is known as the consumption demand, or that is known as the disposable income. Next determinant of the consumption demand is stock of wealth. Stock of wealth. If the stock of wealth is more, there is a tendency among the people to spend more, and as a result consumption demand will be high. If you have more wealth, if you have lots of money with you, then your consumption demand will be higher. But whatever wealth you have not stocked or you have not saved, you have just spent your income, then your consumption demand will be low. Next feature for the consumption demand is credit facility. If the credit facility available with you is good, that is high, available at low rate of, then easy repayment facility, you will have more consumption demand. Suppose the rates of interest are less on higher amounts, so on higher amounts also you have to pay less in rate of interest, so you will start consuming more. When you consume more, your consumption demand will increase. So if the credit facilities are good, that is as per your considerations, you are getting high amounts at a lower price, then definitely the demand or the consumption demand by the households, by the consumers will go up. Next is advertisement. Consumption demand increases due to effective and informative advertisements and promotions such as free gifts, discounts, etc. Whenever we go out to shop, whenever we go out to purchase something, if you are getting something free with some product, like suppose you are buying a jam and you are getting some kind of soup free with it, or you're taking a sauce, bottle of sauce, you're getting a soup packet free with it, you will go for it definitely. So that advertisement, the sales promotion, the other techniques, discounts, coupons, premiums, whatever sales promotion techniques are followed, or good advertisement policies are followed by the companies and the production houses, the consumption demand will go up because of those good advertisements. Next feature is future stock. Future stock means if people are less, then consumption demand will be more. You don't have to stock for the future. You want to spend the money today, and definitely you will not stock the money for tomorrow. If people are less worried about future, then the consumption demand will be more. I am not worried about the future, I want to live in today and I want to spend the money today, then consumption demand will be more. If I am worried about the future, I will keep stocking it and I will not spend the money today where I want, then consumption demand will be less. Next feature for the consumption demand, you have price level. Price level is another factor that affects the consumption demand. When the price of the commodity declines, the purchasing power increases. If the price declines, the purchasing power increases. Means if you were spending 20 rupees and the prices have gone down to 15, your purchasing power is increased. Now your purchasing power is rupees 25. Right? So when the price level goes down, the purchasing power increases, and if the purchasing power increases, the consumption will also increase. If the purchasing power goes down, the consumption goes down in return, right? Next is burden of debts. If the consumption pattern also depends on the burden of debts. If I have debts means if I have taken a lot of money from the government, from the banks, if I have taken a lot of money in the form of loans and advances, then a lot of my, income is going in the form of interest. So I have very less disposable income for making the consumption. So if I am overburdened with the debt or any amount of loan that I have to repay, then my consumption will go down. But my life is free, I don't have anything to pay to anybody, then I have a lot of money with me, so I can spend the money the way I want and I can consume more. So consumption demand will go high if my burden of debt is low. Next is permanent income. Income cannot, if your income source is permanent, then your consumption will be more. But if your income source is not permanent, you're not getting income on the permanent basis, your consumption demand will not be high, right? Next is your saving tendency. See, saving tendency means people having a saving tend to spend less on consumption. If I say I will save money today, then what will happen? Money will be saved and less money I will spend on consumption. So having a high tendency to save money, you will have lesser consumption demand, right? Next you have liquidity. Liquidity. You have people having ready cash will spend more. Liquidity means more of cash you have. You have invested less in assets. So if you have more liquidity, that means you have more cash, then you have more of consumption demand. But if you have less of liquidity, that means you are carrying less cash, then your consumption demand will fall down. Last, you have unexpected gains and losses. Unexpected gains and losses. If a person gets unexpected gains, he will spend more on consumption, whereas if he is suffering from losses, then definitely his consumption demand will fall down. So the consumption demand also depends on your gains and losses. The more you are gaining, the more is the demand increasing, but the less your gains are or you are incurring losses, consumption demand will also fall down with that. So this was the consumption demand. We studied two types. Then we studied the determinants of the 12 determinants of the consumption expenditure or consumption demand. Next we will study the investment demand. This is referred to as I. Consumption expenditure or consumption demand was referred as C and investment demand is referred as I. What do you mean by investment demand? Is incurred by private firms on capital goods such as buildings, machineries. Such expenditure leads to capital formation in the country. So what you having? Investment demand is when you are investing in capital goods, right, for further production. That is known as investment demand. Capital goods may be what? Capital goods may be building, machinery, plants, furniture and fixtures. Those are all counted under capital goods. So when you are investing money in the capital goods and this further leading to capital formation. This is known as investment demand. When you are investing money in the capital goods for further production, you are not stopping it, you are not consuming when you are putting money in the investment demand, you are not consuming it directly, but you are using that money for the further to suffice the further demand, right? That is known as investment demand. So investment expenditure, you have several types. You have gross and net, autonomous and induced, and you have financial and real. Now we will study the determinants of investment demand. The first determinant is level of savings. Level of savings is the first determinant of the investment demand. Alright, so level of savings means saving, savings is the main source of investment. It is that part of income of the individuals which is not spent on consumption. If you see, it would be savings, and more the savings would be investment. If you have a certain level of income, and if that level, suppose you are earning 5,000 rupees, right? You have a monthly income of income of 5,000 rupees. Alright, you are consumption, either you are consuming or you are saving. Your consumption is 2,000 and your savings are 3,000. Alright, next case would be you are earning 5,000. Alright, your consumption is 3,500 and your savings is 1,500. Alright, in the first case, when you see consumption is 2,000 and saving is 3,000, so whatever money you have saved, what you will do, you will invest it. Alright, so and here also you will do the same. In the first case, the investment is more because you have spent less on consumption. Alright, if you spend on consumption, what will you invest? You are just consuming the money, what you will invest. So consumption is less, you are not consuming more. Consumption demand is less, you are saving the money and you will invest that saved money. Next case, you are consuming a lot of your income and very less is saved, so less amount of investment will take place. So it depends on the level of savings. If you are saving more of investment will be there, that will be more of investment demand. If you are saving less, there will be less of investment demand. Next determinant is changes in demand. Changes in demand, if there is a change in demand in the favor of the company, it encourages the people to invest more in the business. See, if you have the demand, if you have a goodwill running, a good reputation, then you will have, the business will have, people will invest more in the company, in the form of shares, debentures, whatever. So if there is a changes in demand in the favor of the company, there will be more of the investment demand. Next, changes in the price level. The company may tend to invest more in the business if the change in the price level is in the favor of the company. You will have, if the price level is as per the consumers, then what will happen? If it is in the favor of the company, more people will save money and they will invest in the business. But if the price level goes high, there is less of saving and there is less of investment expenditure. Next is government policies. Government policies. If the government policies regarding taxation and imports are in the favor of the company, this may encourage the company to invest more in the business. Right? If you say about the government policies, is government is charging less taxes from the business, so what business is doing? The money is going out of the business is less. If the company is paying more in the form of taxes, there is very less income left, or there is very less profit left to invest back. So government policies, if they are in the favor of the company, the company will invest more in its work. Right? Next is high profit margin. High profit margin, if the company is earning high profits, then definitely it will invest more in its business. If the profits are low, the investment also will be less. Next is marginal efficiency of capital. Marginal efficiency of capital, as long as the returns from the additional capital investment are greater than its cost, the investment continues to take place. See, marginal efficiency of capital, understand what is a marginal efficiency. When you are, suppose I have invested 100 lakhs, right? My returns are good. I have invested 100 lakhs more. I have started getting more. And I have invested 200 lakhs. See how the thing goes. I have invested 100 lakhs. I am getting good profits. I invest 200 more. I will get excellent profits. Now I have invested 300 lakhs and they have become good again. I have invested 500 lakhs. They are stable. I invest 800 lakhs and they started declining. This is marginal efficiency of first 100 lakhs, they were good, you increased it by marginal rate of 100, then again marginal of 100, then it was margin of 200 and margin of 300. Alright, so as you are keeping increasing the doses of capital, every additional capital, this 100 is additional here, here 100 is additional, here 200 is additional. It was 300, now it is 500, so 200 lakhs extra you added. Here you added 300 extra. So whatever additional capital you are adding, and you are getting more than what, if you are getting more than what you are adding, that till then you will have investment demand. But a point will come when you are keep adding it, but you are not getting the returns, or the cost is increasing, the profits are going down. So investment demand will be less. Next is future expectations. If a firm expects high profits in the long run, especially in the case of projects with long gestation periods, there are more chances of high investment, and vice versa. If I expect that I will get good returns or very high returns from this business, but the gestation period is long, that means there will be a long period after what I will receive, but that amount will be very high. So if I have that future expectation, I will have a lot of, or I will have a high expectation investment demand. But if I expect the profits to be very less with the kind of investment I am doing, then definitely the investment demand will go down. Next is political and economic stability. You have businessmen are induced to invest more if the political and economic. If you know that the government is changing, government is getting rules, every time there is dwindling of government, then definitely there is no economic stability, no political stability in the state or in the country or in the city, then the investment demand will go down. They say an investor may think that why I should invest money, if some policy comes, I have to shut down my business, or I have to sell it to some other company, then definitely the investment demand will go down, right? Next is rate of interest. There is inverse relationship between rate of interest and investment. As you know, when you when you have more money, the interest rates, what will have? The increase in the rates will fall in the investment. Rates of interest increase, right? And what will happen? You will invest less money, or you will borrow less money, invest less money. And if rates of interest go down, you will have more of the investment. So these play the inverse roles with each other. Next is bank credit. If businessmen are getting loans and advances from the bank, or the bank credit policy is very lenient, then the businessmen will invest more money, or there will be more of the investment demand. But if the businessmen are not getting an easy bank credit, then definitely they will have a less of the investment demand. So bank credit is not available for whatever reasons, right? Then the investment may be low on all grounds, right? So this was the investment demand. Next is government demand. Government demand. What is government demand? Many countries in the world have accepted the concept of welfare state. You know what the welfare state is? Has been a rapid increase in the government expenditure, which constitutes an important part of the aggregate demand. Aggregate demand, or government demand or government expenditure means government is trying to build up a welfare state. Welfare state means government is spending, or it is making huge expenditures to develop or to flourish or to make a state a better place to live in, right? It is taking many welfare policies, it is providing subsidies, it is cleaning up the city, it is providing pension up to the certain age, it is providing free education, it is providing the infrastructural benefits, giving good roads, water supply. So these are all the government, where what government is demanding, government expenditure is making expenditure for building up the welfare state. Alright. So what are the expenditures? There are different government expenditures. We will study the different types of government expenditures. You have a consumption expenditure and investment expenditure. Now government is making consumption expenditure and government is making investment expenditure. Now what is the consumption expenditure made by the government? It refers to the expenditure made by the government by providing public utility services to the people of the country. It includes expenditure It includes government expenditure, payments made to the employees, interest paid to loans, defense expenditure on police. This is all consumption expenditure. But when you talk about the investment expenditure, it refers to when the government is increasing the stock in the goods, that is buildings, high bridges, power generations, and etc. Consumption expenditure is when government is spending money on the people, like for the defense people. It's also making payment, creating good water supplies, educational services. It's not only the education, certain other services are provided to the girl child. Then you have the different payments that our government is making. There are different welfare programs or the utility services that are undertaken by the government, like giving help to the defense personnel. This is all undertaken by the government, and this is not like the government is also paying loan from its side, interest from its side, and it is freeing the farmers from paying their loans or the interest. That is all the consumption expenditure made by the government. What about the investment? Whatever assets the government is building for the state, that is maybe the buildings, the power plants, you have good power generation, full plants are being made by the government, buildings are being constructed by the government, bridges, dams, roads are being constructed. That will all come under the consumption expenditure by the government. So government demand has consumption expenditure and investment expenditure. Next you have the foreign demand. Foreign demand is a part of the aggregate demand. Demand for a home country's goods and services from foreign countries is known as foreign demand. Aggregate demand, and services from foreign countries. It is usually measured the difference between exports and imports. The foreign demand can be positive while somehow it can be negative when exports are less. So it is basically the difference between exports and imports. There are certain factors that are affecting the foreign demand. First is of the export and import policies of the trading country. You have certain foundations which are set, or certain limits which are set for the exporting and importing countries, and there are certain legal some legal formalities they have to comply with. So this is also the foreign demand depends on the export and import policies. What policies the trading company is following, and accordingly the demand will be less or more. Then you have the exchange rate also. If your exchange rate is going down, that is the rupee is falling, then you will have less of the trade. Alright, but if the value of your rupee is good, then definitely your trade will flourish or it will bounce up. Next is you have prices of goods and services in different countries. Prices of goods and services in different countries. If you are getting more in your country by selling the goods and services, then you will sell in your own country, because you will be getting less in that other country, and plus 100 of legal formalities you have to go through. So better you're selling it in your own country. So it all depends what are the prices of the goods and services prevailing in the countries. Next is you have the political and economic relations. Political and economic relations between the trading country. That also matters. If the political relations are not good, you will not have export or import with that country. Next is economic growth of different trading countries. Right? Then you have the international trade agreements. What are the national trade agreements? You have the WTO, you have the GATT. Then these are the different agreements. That is World Trade Organization. Then you have GATT as General Agreement in Trade, Tariff and Trade. So if there is trade agreements, you are a part of these firms, then you have different free trade zones, and there are certain subsidies which you are provided for. But if you have a clash between them, then definitely that will affect your foreign trade. Size of the population and other factors also matter. And economic conditions. Economic conditions are important. If the period of recession is going on, then there will be less of the foreign trade. But if you see there is a period of recovery or boom, you have more of the foreign trade. These are some of the determinants of foreign trade, and this is the formula basically that makes up the foreign trade. Foreign demand is a part of the aggregate demand, as we know. Demand for a home country's goods and services from foreign countries is known as foreign demand. Alright, and we have already studied the formula. X means exports and M means imports. Right, this is the foreign demand that we have done. So we have undertaken all the aggregate demands. First we studied the consumption demand, then we studied the investment demand, then we had gone through the after that we had done government demand, and the lastly was the foreign demand. Next is effects of population on consumption expenditure. You will see the different effects of population on your consumption pattern or your consumption expenditure. You have studied there are two types of consumption expenditure we have studied. One was the autonomous, the other was induced consumption expenditure. Also includes consumption expenditure by the government. See, what is the effect of population? Effect on consumer expenditure, on government, on the different types of expenditures that you have. So we will study only the effect of population on consumer and government expenditure. That is directly consumption expenditure is undertaken by the consumption demand and also the government. Government also undertakes the consumption expenditure. So we will study effect on consumption expenditure, and secondly we will study effect on government consumption expenditure. Right? See, with the growth in population, the overall consumption expenditure will increase. Definitely consumption demand will increase. When there are more people, there will be more demand. Increase in population will raise the demand, more employment. See, more demand of means more production. More production means more employment. More employment means more income. More income means again more demand. So this will increase the national income. When we talk of effect on government consumption expenditure, the government also incurs expenditure on health services, defense, etc. So if there is increase in population, the government expenditure will also increase. The government has to spend more on education because there will be more people. The government has to spend more on subsidies, more to the defense, right? So there will be more of the government expenditure. So population is increasing, the consumption expenditure is also increasing, and the government's consumption expenditure also increases. Next we will study is types of investment and expenditure. First you have induced investment. Right? This is one form. Second, you have autonomous investment. Then you have the gross investment. You have net investment, financial investment, and lastly you have the real investment. Alright, so you have these 6 kinds of investment expenditure. First we will study what is induced investment. Investment made by the business firm with a view to make profits when they are encouraged by favorable market conditions. Favorable market condition means the government policies are very lenient, right? Price level is good and some advantages are taken, so they are encouraged to invest more in the business. So private sector invested is morely induced investment. When everything is running in the favor of the business, that is the induced investment, and it's making payment, investing in money in the business, then that is known as the induced investment. Next is autonomous investment. It refers to the investment made by the government in the public sector without reference to profit and other market conditions. See, infrastructure for roads, bridges, dams, education, natural gas, this is all autonomous investment. You know, investment whenever you want to earn profits, your conditions are favorable and you're putting more money in the business in order to earn high profits, that is induced investment. Autonomous investment means when you don't think about profit and you're investing. Government doesn't think of making any profit, but still it is investing money in the form of construction of roads, dams, bridges, power plants, etc. That is known as autonomous investment. Next is gross investment, that is the total investment in fixed assets like building machines without deducting the depreciation, right? That is gross. And net is when you deduct the depreciation. That is normal wear and tear, right? That is net investment. When you talk of the financial investment, it is the investment expenditure made for the purchases of shares, bonds, securities in the country during the year, right? In the money terms. So when there is, you will see how much money is made and taken off out of the shares, securities, debentures. That money in that investment in the form of money is known as financial investment. Real investment is, you have the real investment, it is the investment made for creating new or physical capital assets, that is machinery, capital investment. You know, real means you can also say physical investments. Physical, that is plants, buildings, machinery. Here financial means money wise. That is known as the financial investment. This is the real investment in capital assets. This is shares, securities, financial. Net is investment when you deduct the depreciation, without deducting the depreciation, and you have the autonomous and induced. Next we will study the aggregate demand function. You have the aggregate demand function. See, you have J.M. Keynes, who is a very famous economist, and he says aggregate demand function relates to any given level of employment proceeds with the level of employment expected to realize. That is, you will see, you have the relation expect to get the selling. The aggregate demand function explains the relationship between the aggregate demand price or expected sales and the level of employment. See, there is a connection of aggregate demand and a level of employment. If there is more demand, right, if the demand increases, what will increase? Production will increase, right? If the production will increase, what will increase? Employment will increase. If employment is increasing, what will increase? Income. If income is increasing, what will increase? Demand. So we will study the relationship between demand and the employment. What is the connection between the aggregate demand function and the employment? You have the level of employment. I will just make the aggregate demand schedule and I will let you know the level of employment and I will let you know the aggregate demand price. And I will let you know their level of employment. See, you have 10, 15, 20, 25. I am just taking the fictitious figures. Then you have the aggregate demand price 3,000, 4,500, 5,500. You have 3,000, 4,500, 5,500. These are all the fictitious figures I am taking, right? Then any other figure you can have, you can take 6,250. Any figures which you want, you can take at your own will. Now see what you have. Aggregate demand curves. Now we will, if you want, you can make the curve also. Right? How you will make the curve? What you will have? You will have employment. Employment you will always have on OX axis, and demand you will have on demand price, that is you will have on OY axis. Alright, so this is O. How much it is? 10, right? 15, 20 and 25. 15, 20 and 25. Then you have the price. You have price 3, 4, 5. You can take 3,000, 500, 3,000, then you can have 5 difference, you can take it. You can take 3500, you can take 4500, you can take 5500, 6500, and finally 7500. This is what you can do. At the level of 10, it is how much? 3000. 15, it is how much? 4500. 20, it is 5500. 25, it is somewhere 6250. This is what you have. The demand slopes upwards from left to right. This is your aggregate demand function curve. This is known as aggregate demand function curve. Now see, the aggregate demand curve slopes upwards from left to right, which indicates that demand increases with the increase in employment. Definitely, if the employment is increasing, the level of income also increases, and as the employment increases, the level also goes up. According to Keynes, as the income increases due to employment, people tend to spend a smaller portion of in the income expenditure. This means that employment increases, the demand also rises, but at a diminishing rate. Right? So that is very clear that when you have more of employment, your income will increase. Income increasing, definitely your demand will also increase. Next, you will study the aggregate supply. Aggregate supply function. You have aggregate supply refers to the total amount of goods and services produced and supplied in the economy during a given period of time. See, now you are studying the demand, that is goods that are demanded. Now aggregate supply function means goods and services supplied at a given period of time at a given income level. Keynes aggregate supply refers to the total quantity of goods and supply which can be produced with available factors of production. Right? Now, what are the determinants of the aggregate supply? We will study the determinants. We will study the aggregate schedule and the aggregate curve. See, aggregate supply means the total supply of goods and services at a particular time at the particular price level. Now, what do you mean by that? You have how you are supplying the goods only with the help of the factors of production. Supply always depend on the factor of production. If you have land, labor, capital and organization, then only you will be able to supply the goods. So what are the determinants? You have aggregate supply right, equals to function of, right, function of N bar, L, K bar and F. You have this is T bar. Right? Now what is N bar? It is considered to be natural resources, that is raw materials. If you talk about, this is said to be constant. Alright, then you say K. K is the capital. This is, I have not put a bar on this, means this is variable in nature. It can be changed. But if you talk about natural resources, K is the capital, and you have the T as the technology, state of technology. They all indicate that they remain constant. Right? Such factors remain constant in the short run. The level of output depends upon the level of employment. Right? So we have already studied the supply function means it depends on the level of employment. Who are employed? The labor is employed. So there is no bar. It is N means natural resources or raw materials, that remains constant in the short run. K is the capital, remains constant, and T is the technology, that remains constant in the short run. So this is the function of aggregate supply. Let's study the determinants of the aggregate supply. First you have the natural resources, N bar. Alright, so natural resources refer to all kinds of resources which are freely available in the nature and used in the process of production. They include land. You know, natural resources, we have all studied that's something above the land, below the land, right? So they are all included in the natural resources, depends on the availability and utilization. So difficult to change the size of the natural resources, that is why they remain constant. From the short run you cannot increase or decrease, so they have to remain constant. Next is you have the supply of labor. This is a variable factor of production, right? And the supply of labor depends on the size of the population, age composition, etc., and the training of the labor force. The size and efficiency also depends. If you can say, it is assumed that the labor force can be increased or decreased as per the demand, and as per the demand you can have that the supply factor also. Next you have is the capital. Capital is K bar. Again, this is constant. Capital is produced means of production. It is man-made factor. Aggregate supply goods depends on the availability of use and quality of capital. Capital may be goods, capital may be money, capital may be plant and machinery, but in the short run you cannot increase or decrease the capital also. That remains constant. Last is the state of technology. That is T bar. In the short run, that state of technology also, it is, you know what, state of technology is modern techniques, methods in the used in the production process. You are using, your state of technology is getting better day by day, but day by day doesn't mean in a very short period. In a short period you cannot increase or decrease or upgrade or update or bring any changes in the state of technology. That remains constant. So you have the aggregate supply, you have natural resources that remain constant. This is variable. Capital remains constant and state of technology remains constant. Alright, next is you have aggregate supply function, give you the schedule and the diagram. Aggregate supply function you have, and you have the level of employment and aggregate supply price. Again you have, so I'll just have a schedule for you. You have the level of employment, alright, and then you have the aggregate supply price. Alright, level of employment is maybe that is workers. You know, level of employment means workers. 10, 15, 20, 25. Right? Then you have the aggregate supply price 2, 4, 6, 9, whatever you want you can take. 2000, 4,000, 6,000 and 8,000. This is your aggregate supply price. Let's see how you make it. This is OX axis and this is OY axis. You are taking the price on the OY axis and you are taking the employment on the OX axis. Alright. See, you have 10, 15, 20 and 25. Then you have 2000, you have 4000, 6 and 8000. At 10, your level of at supply price 2000, the level of employment is 10, 15, 20 and 25. Alright. This is aggregate supply curve, right, or aggregate supply function curve, whatever. Now you see, when the firms provide a level or certain level of employment, they incur certain costs in the form of wages and rent. They also expect a certain amount of profit. The minimum sale proceeds are called aggregate supply function. The aggregate supply function indicates the relationship between level of employment and sale proceeds. How much you are selling the goods and at what you have the basically the level of employment. This is known as the supply curve. Now last you have the macroeconomic equilibrium. See, macroeconomic equilibrium is also referred to as effective demand. According to Keynes, the macroeconomic equilibrium is determined with the intersection of aggregate demand and aggregate supply in the economy. Alright, you have curves. This you have total income here, and you have total expenditure here. Alright, you have the demand and the supply curves. right? Demand will always be there. You will always demand some or the other commodity, but you don't know or you're not sure whether the supply will be there or not. So supply may start from zero, but the demand will never start from zero. That is the reason. Then you have the intersection point here. This is E, you can say. This is employment, this is income. E is the expenditure and Y is the income. Alright. The aggregate demand consists of consumption demand. Now you know what the demand is, right? These are the two curves. What do you mean by aggregate demand? Aggregate demand means you have the consumption demand, the investment demand, government demand and foreign demand. What do you mean by aggregate supply? It is availability of the factors. Which factors? Natural factors, labor, capital and state of technology. It is that level of economic activity in the economy when the aggregate demand equates aggregate supply. What is effective demand? When aggregate demand is equal. See, this is the point where what is happening? Aggregate demand is equal to aggregate supply. The equilibrium point of effective demand is that point where aggregate demand is equal to aggregate supply. We have seen aggregate supply and aggregate demand. Point of effective demand, it is the point where total expenditure is equal to total income. We can also say that at this point total expenditure is equal to total income. Alright, so this is what effective demand means. You have a macroeconomic equilibrium, also known as effective demand, and you have total income and expenditure. Then you have aggregate supply and demand curves. You have either where the aggregate demand and supply curves intersect, that point is known as equilibrium or effective demand. Then you can also say that aggregate demand and supply are equal to each other, or total expenditure equates or is equal to total income. In this chapter, that is chapter number 10, you have another important things that need to be studied is distinguish between aggregate demand and aggregate supply. Then you have to study consumption and aggregate demand and aggregate supply. You need to know the difference. Then you should also know what is consumption and investment expenditure, autonomous and induced demands, difference between export and imports, the gross investment and the net investment. These are some of the differences which are to be studied in order to have the summary of the chapter.